Indigenous people across Canada today are facing a litany of abuse. There is an unacceptable gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in the enjoyment of basic human rights. It is time for Canadian citizens to realize they cannot consider their country free and fair, whilst the Indigenous communities suffer great injustices and face systematic discrimination.
Additional mental health workers have arrived in Attawapiskat to counsel the community through its latest suicide crisis. The First Nations chief declared a state of emergency over the weekend after 11 suicide attempts in a single day.
Do you know about current Indigenous issues?
Not much at all.
I don't know anything about Aboriginals.
I know that a lot of people are facing problems in the Aboriginal community. A lot of people are starting to kill themselves due to a problem that I don't know much about.
I wasn't even aware that the Indigenous people were having problems. I mean, I just heard about the suicides, but that's about it.
Winter has arrived in northern Ontario. In the Indigenous Cree community of Attawapiskat, temperatures can reach 50 degrees below zero. But at least 5 families here are living in tents. 19 other families are in shacks without electricity, heat, or running water.
There's been multiple children suicides. I think the youngest one was 9 years old because they just didn't feel like they were even valued in their own country. Their parents are alcoholics and they can't get a good education. There's no clean water, and the money that's being sent to them by the government, they don't really know where it's going because it's not helping them. They've been sent millions of dollars, but either there's someone on the other end that's pocketing the money, but it's not getting to them the way that they need it.
It's really surprising to me how the people in Attawapiskat, with the media just covering the suicides on the young teenagers, and they're not taking the other little things into consideration, like the no access to clean water, no education, and aside from the suicides, these little things can really sort of have a bigger impact.
Canada has, for generations, if not centuries, broken its relationship and its partnership with Indigenous peoples. We ignored the fact that thousands upon thousands of Indigenous women and girls went missing and murdered over the past few decades. And we need to re-engage with that responsibly. We need to look at the fact that a kid who grows up in an Indigenous community doesn't have the same access to education or positive outcomes that any kids born anywhere else in the country have. So there's a lot of work to do on that file. There's more.
Well, in your opinion, do you think suicide attempts are a cry for help?
Oh, without question, for sure. That's the ultimate cry for help, I think. There's a lot that leads up to that. There are other cries that lead up to the sort of ultimate one. Anything kinds of addiction, self-abuse. I mean, there's a lot of other things that lead into suicide, but clearly, that's the ultimate.
And I just think that it's kind of unfair. I'm glad that we're accepting so many refugees into the country from Syria, but we're not even focusing on the troubles that are going on in our own backyard. And we're supposed to be a really developed country, and we're not really even fully capable of giving ourselves that statement.
I'm the events coordinator. We are Native Child and Family Services of Toronto, so we are a multi-service agency, but we're also a CAS mandated agency. So we have a lot of support programs for children, families, and youth. I think in the past that cry for help would have been when they're asking for funding for youth programs, or when they're seeking resources. That was the cry for help. This is an alarm.
This is an alarm, yeah.
Yeah. It's not a warning. It's not warning signs, and it isn't a cry for help. That was a long time ago. This is nobody helped.
They've been suffering without adequate housing. Their education system is terrible. And we wonder why these children, some even as young as 9 years old, are committing suicide. I mean, that's the only thing that caught the media's attention over, the past couple weeks, even though they've been living with these conditions basically their entire lives.
My name is Michael Etherington. I'm the Cultural Program Manager here at the Native Canadian Center in Toronto. So I guess my input will be on a voluntary basis, so it's on my own personal input here. And from my roots, I'm actually originally from James Bay and Moose City Moose Factory. So I've had experience growing up on reserve and then off reserve as well in the urban context. So in regards to my work beyond here, as well as also a trainer and facilitator for Ontario Federation of Indigenous Representatives from 2011-2016. So I went around to communities to provide support to service providers within the Indigenous community. And you can see that as a contrast for other communities that aren't bound by broken treaty promises or inequities through allocations through the INAC system that are facilitated for the Indian Act. So I think I don't want to say for our community that there's direct discrimination, but from a policy and legislative perspective, there is disparities that have to be addressed in terms of how these are being interpreted today. Because, for example, the conditions that you see within on-reserve communities aren't even standardized in terms of access for services that many of us as Canadians have opportunities towards. So if you look at community infrastructure in terms of housing, employment, education, mental health services, and et cetera, some communities are heavily under-resourced.
We have discriminated against Indigenous children for generations, for decades, for centuries. And that's why this budget put forward $8.6 billion, never before seen levels of funding for Indigenous communities. And is it enough? No, it's not. And is it going to fix everything overnight? Absolutely not. We have an awful lot of work to do in the coming years, in the coming decades.
The Indigenous issues have been disregarded by the government and looked past by Canadians for decades, which has caused their living conditions and economies to gradually worsen.
Granting Canadian Indigenous people money is not a long-term solution. They need guidance to fix infrastructure and direction to aid their people.
The Indigenous have faced systematic discrimination and have been overlooked in the eyes of the Canadian government.
Not only does the government need to take immediate action, but Canadians need to grasp an understanding of the severity of the Indigenous crisis happening in our own